coffee has gone cold again. That is the third morning in a row I have let it happen, sitting at the kitchen table in Sudbury with my hands wrapped around the mug like it might warm something deeper than my palms. The maple outside the window has started to turn. Orange at the tips first, the way it always does in September, the way my mother taught me to notice. She said the tree tells you things if you pay attention. I have been paying attention to a lot of things lately. My daughter got married 6 weeks ago. I was not there for the reception. I need to say that plainly, because when I try to dress it up, when I try to find the gentle version of what happened, I lose the thread of what is true. And the truth is the only thing I have left to hold on to. Her name is Lydia. She is 34 years old. I raised her alone from the time she was 9, after her father moved to Calgary with a woman he had met at a conference, and decided that starting over was more appealing than staying. I do not say that with bitterness anymore. I said it with bitterness for a long time. But somewhere around my 58th birthday, I let it go. The way you let go of a stone. You have been carrying so long, you have forgotten you are carrying it. You open your hand, you are surprised by the lightness. Lydia was a serious child, careful with her words, careful with her feelings, the kind of little girl who would think for a long time before answering a question. I loved that about her. I loved watching her think. She had her grandmother's eyes, pale grey, the kind that look silver in certain light, and her grandmother's habit of pressing her lips together when she disagreed with something but was not ready to say so. I gave her everything I knew how to give, not money. I was a supply teacher for 11 years, then a school librarian for 19 more, and money was never something we had in abundance. But time, presence, Saturday mornings at the farmer's market on Elgin Street, drives up to Manitoulin Island every summer with the windows down and the radio, on whatever station she wanted. I read to her until she was old enough to be embarrassed by it, and then I read beside her, both of us on the couch, with our own books, not saying anything, just being there. I did not know how to prepare her for someone like Mitchell. She met him at 31. He was charming in the particular way that men who have studied charm can be. The right questions, the right silences, the way he remembered small details and brought them back weeks later, so you felt seen. I noticed it but told myself I was being cynical. Lydia was happy. That was what mattered. He worked in commercial real estate, developments mostly, finding land, arranging financing, coordinating with investors. He talked about it the way some men talk about hunting, the thrill of the acquisition, the satisfaction of the deal. I own 43 acres outside of Espanola. My mother left it to me when she died in 2009. It is not fancy land. There is a small cabin on it that needs work, a creek that runs along the eastern edge, and a stand of white birch that turns so bright in October it looks like something is burning. My mother grew up on that land, her mother before her. I spent my childhood summers there, and I have spent every Thanksgiving there since I was old enough to drive myself. It is not an investment to me, it is a place where I know who I am. Mitchell knew about the land from the beginning. Lydia had told him early on the way you share things when you are falling in love and everything about your life feels worth sharing. He asked questions about it that I thought were just curiosity. How many acres? Is there road access? Is it in a protected zone? I answered him honestly. I had no reason not to. The engagement happened on a Tuesday. Lydia called me from the parking lot of a restaurant in Toronto, where he had proposed over dessert. She was crying in the good way. I cried too. I sat on my porch in the September dark and cried and felt something enormous and tender open up in my chest. I drove down to meet them that weekend. Mitchell shook my hand and smiled and said he was the luckiest man he knew. Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder and I thought, this is what I worked for. This is the thing, this moment right here. The wedding planning started almost immediately. They wanted a summer wedding, a venue outside of Barrie, a converted barn with a catering kitchen and string lights and a view of the hills. Beautiful, honestly. I looked at the photographs on the website and thought it suited her. About 4 months before the wedding, Mitchell called me. Not Lydia. Mitchell. That should have been the first thing I paid attention to. He said he had been doing some research on the land, on the region, and that there was real development interest in the area around Hispaniola. A company was looking to build a seasonal resort community, luxury cabins, a private lake, the kind of thing that attracted buyers from Toronto and Ottawa. He said my 43 acres were positioned well, that if I were willing to sell, or even to enter into a partnership agreement, I could be looking at a significant return. He used numbers I had not heard in relation to anything I owned. I said I was not interested. He said he understood, and that he just wanted me to have the information. I thought that was the end of it. In April, Lydia called and asked if I had thought any more about what Mitchell had said. I told her what I had told him. The land was not for sale. She went quiet in that way. She has, the pressed lips silence, and then said that Mitchell thought I was being sentimental, that I was letting emotion get in the way of a practical decision. I said that some things are worth being sentimental about. She did not call for 3 weeks after that. When she called again, it was about seating arrangements and whether I thought her father should be invited. We did not mention the land. I thought we had moved past it. I was wrong about that too. The wedding was on the 14th of July. I drove down the evening before and stayed at a hotel in Barrie that cost more per night than I usually spend in a week. I did not mind. I pressed my dress and I got my hair done in the morning at a salon 2 blocks from the hotel, and I thought about my mother and how she would have loved to see Lydia married. She would have cried from the moment she arrived and apologized for crying, and then cried more. The ceremony was held outside. Lydia was extraordinary. She wore a dress she had found at a shop in Kensington Market. Simple ivory, a low back. And she walked down the aisle with her chin up and her eyes bright, and I could see her grandmother in her so clearly in that moment that my throat closed over. I sat in the front row on the bride's side. Mitchell's family filled the other side, a lot of them, cousins and colleagues, and people I did not know. His mother did not speak to me at the ceremony. I told myself she was nervous. We moved inside after. The reception hall smelled of cedar and white flowers. There were small glass bottles of wildflowers on every table and a 3-piece band setting up in the corner. I found my seat. I was at a table with Lydia's university friends, none of whom I knew well, and I told myself that was fine, that I would introduce myself, that this was a party and I should act like one. The first hour was all right. The food came and I ate and smiled and answered questions about what it was like to raise a daughter on your own, and said the things that are true, that it was hard sometimes and worth it always. Then Mitchell's best man came to my table. He leaned down close and said that Lydia would like to speak with me. He said it quietly. He had the look of someone delivering news he did not want to deliver. I followed him through a door at the side of the room. We went down a short hallway. Lydia was there, and Mitchell was beside her, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man on his wedding day. Lydia said there had been a complaint. I said I did not understand. She said that Mitchell's uncle, a man I had spoken to for perhaps 5 minutes by the drinks table, had told Mitchell that I had made a comment about the family. Something disparaging. I had not. I said so. I told her I had spoken to the man briefly and said nothing that could be taken as an insult. Mitchell said his uncle was very clear about what I had said. I looked at my daughter. I waited for her to look at me the way she looked at me when she was a girl, and she needed to know if something was true. I waited for her to look at me that way and trust what she saw. She looked at the floor. Mitchell said, very carefully, very quietly, with the smile still sitting on the edges of his mouth, like something he had not quite put away, that perhaps it would be better if I went back to the hotel, that the situation was uncomfortable for everyone, that they could speak to me tomorrow once things had settled. I stood there for a moment. I want to tell you I said something. I want to tell you I had words for it. but the truth is that my mouth went dry and my hands went cold, and all I could think was, this is my daughter's wedding. This is the day I have thought about for 34 years. And she is looking at the floor. I said, all right. I walked back through the hall. I did not stop at my table. I got my coat from the rack by the door, and I walked outside into the July night, and I stood in the parking lot with the sound of the band starting up behind me and the smell of the fields, and I breathed, in and out, in and out, in and out, until I was only a woman standing in a parking lot, not a woman who had just been asked to leave her daughter's wedding. I drove back to the hotel. I did not call anyone. I sat on the edge of the bed in my pressed dress, and I stared at the wall, and I tried to understand what had just happened. I am 63 years old. I have buried my mother and my marriage and 2 friendships I thought would last forever. I know what loss feels like. I know the particular quality of silence that follows something that cannot be undone. This had that quality. I did not sleep until nearly 4 in the morning. At 9:15 the next day, Lydia called. I thought, she is calling to explain. She is calling to say she is sorry. She is calling to say she has spent the night understanding what she did, and she cannot let another hour go by without telling me. She said, Mum, I need you to think about what we talked about with the land. I sat very still on the hotel bed. The curtains were open and the morning light was coming in flat and grey, and I thought about the maple at home, and how it was probably still green, still weeks away from turning. I said, what? She said that Mitchell had spoken to the development company, that they were ready to move, that if I could sign a letter of intent by the end of the month, a formal agreement could be drawn up within 60 days. She said it was a good opportunity. She said I was not getting younger. She said the land was just sitting there. Just sitting there. I said, your wedding was yesterday. She said she knew. She said she was sorry about how things had gone. She said it had been a stressful night for everyone. She said Mitchell's uncle could be difficult. I asked her if she believed me, about what I had or had not said. She paused for a long time. She said, I think we should focus on moving forward. I told her I needed to think. She said, please do not wait too long. I drove home to Sudbury that afternoon. 5 hours, mostly highway, the kind of drive where you stop noticing the road and just follow it. I did not listen to the radio. I thought about my mother. I thought about the creek on the eastern edge of the property and the way it sounds in spring when the snow melt comes down from the higher ground. I thought about a particular afternoon when Lydia was 11 and we had walked out to the birch stand, and she had said that she wanted to live there one day, in the cabin, with the trees. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. I called my own lawyer the next morning, not a real estate lawyer. Lydia had suggested once that I talk to a real estate lawyer about the land, and I understood now whose recommendation that had been. I called a woman I had known for years who had helped me with my mother's estate, who I trusted completely. Her name is not important. What is important is that she listened to everything I said without interrupting. And then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, let's make sure this land is protected. We spent 2 weeks on it. She explained my options carefully. She talked about what it would mean to place the land in a trust, structured in a way that I retained full control during my lifetime, with clear terms about what happened after. She talked about the difference between a family trust and a bare trust, and when each was appropriate. She did not rush me. She did not tell me what I should value. I signed the documents on a Thursday. The land is mine. It will remain mine in the way that I want it to remain mine, which is to say, not as a development opportunity, not as a return on investment, not as a transaction. It exists the way it has always existed, as a place where the creek runs along the eastern edge and the birch trees burn orange in October, and the cabin needs new shingles on the north side, which I have been meaning to address for 3 years. Mitchell called 2 days after the documents were signed. He did not know they had been signed. He was very pleasant. He said the company had extended the window, that there was no pressure, that he only wanted me to know the offer was still on the table. He said, "I just want what's best for everyone, of course." I said, "I know you do." He said he would send me some information, some numbers, some projections. I said, "There's no need." He said he didn't understand. I said, "The land isn't available, Mitchell. It's been placed in trust. It won't be available during my lifetime, and the terms after that are not connected to anything you're involved in." There was a silence. He said, "Lydia knew about this?" I said, "I didn't discuss it with Lydia. The land is mine." He said, and this was the moment I understood exactly what kind of man he was. He said, "That seems like a decision made in anger." I said, "It seems like a decision made on a Thursday morning with a clear head and a good lawyer." He did not respond to that. The call ended shortly after. Lydia called that evening. She was upset, not sad, upset. There is a difference. Sad is something that happens to you. Upset is something you direct. She said I was being punitive, that I was using the land as a weapon, that I had made a major legal decision without consulting the family. I said, "I am the family, Lydia. It's my mother's land." She said I was being selfish. I sat with that for a moment. Selfish. I turned the word over and looked at its underside. I said, "I was asked to leave your wedding. The next morning you called me about the land before you called me about anything else. I need you to sit with those two things." She was quiet. I said, "I love you. That is not something the land has anything to do with, but the land was never part of what I owed you, and I need you to understand that." She said she needed time to think. I said, "Take all the time you need." We have not spoken since then. That has been 6 weeks. I do not know what 6 weeks will become. I know what I hope it will become, which is a door left open that she eventually chooses to walk through. I know that hope and outcome are different things. What I know more concretely is this. I drove out to the property last weekend. Stayed 2 nights in the cabin. Woke up both mornings to the sound of the creek and the smell of wood smoke from the fire I had let burn down overnight. On the second morning, a pair of mergansers landed on the water near the eastern bank and stayed long enough for me to watch them without moving from my chair on the porch. My mother would have called that a sign. She was not a superstitious woman in most ways, but she believed that certain moments were given to you on purpose. I am 63 years old. I have made mistakes in this life that I carry with me in the particular way you carry things you cannot put down. Not all day, not constantly, but there at the edges, present. I do not think protecting what my mother gave me is one of those mistakes. I used to think that loving someone meant giving them everything they asked for. I spent a long time believing that. 11 years teaching other people's children, 19 years caring for other people's books. 34 years raising a daughter, who I would do it all for again without a second thought. But I have learned, slowly, in the way that real learning happens, which is not in classrooms and not in books, but in parking lots at night, with the sound of a band behind you, and the cold coming up through your good shoes. I have learned that love is not the same thing as surrender. The maple is almost fully orange now. I can see it from where I am sitting. The coffee is still warm this time. I remembered to drink it. I keep coming back to the parking lot, not the signing of the documents, not the phone call with Mitchell, not even the conversation with my daughter the night she told me I was being selfish. The parking lot, July heat still sitting in the air at 9 in the evening, the sound of the band carrying through the walls of that beautiful converted barn, and me standing there in my good shoes thinking, how did we get here? The honest answer is that we got here the same way most things fall apart, slowly and then all at once. I made concessions over years that I told myself were kindness. I did not ask the questions I should have asked about Mitchell. I saw what I wanted to see because I wanted Lydia to be happy, and wanting something that much has a way of narrowing your vision. That is not self-blame. I want to be clear about that distinction because I spent too many years confusing the two. Understanding how you arrived somewhere is not the same as deciding the damage was your fault. I made choices out of love. Other people made choices out of calculation. Those are different things, and they lead to different consequences, and eventually the consequences catch up. What I learned in that parking lot, and in the months since, is something I could not have put into words at 40 or even at 50. It has to do with the difference between what you give freely and what you allow to be taken. I gave Lydia my time, my attention, my presence, my sacrifice, freely, without keeping score, without expectation of return. That is what you do when you love someone. But the land was not mine to give in that way. It was my mother's before mine. It belonged to a lineage of women who understood something about holding on, and I nearly let it slip because I confused love with obligation. The clearest thinking I have ever done has happened in quiet. In a lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning, on the porch of a cabin with a cup of tea going cold, walking the eastern edge of 43 acres of land that no one can take from me now. There is a kind of intelligence that only comes when you stop moving long enough to let the situation settle, the way silt settles in still water. I could not think clearly when I was trying to manage everyone's feelings. I could only think clearly when I finally sat with my own. And the courage it took, because it did take courage, I am not going to pretend otherwise, was not dramatic. It was not a confrontation. It was a phone call and a meeting and a signature on a document, and then telling my son-in-law plainly that the answer was no. Courage at 63 looks like that. It looks like continuing to do the right thing even when the people you love are disappointed in you for it, even when the silence from your daughter's phone goes on for 6 weeks and you do not know when it will end. I think about Lydia. I think about her every day. I think about who she is underneath the pressure Mitchell has put on her, underneath whatever it is she has convinced herself about what loyalty means. I think she knows on some level what she did. I think that is part of why the silence has gone on as long as it has. I am not waiting. That is something I had to decide deliberately, not to wait, not to hold my life in suspension while someone else decides whether to come back. The maple outside my window is bare now. Winter came and I let it come. I kept living. What you refuse to let be taken. That is the measure of what you truly value, not what you say you value, what you protect when the pressure is on and the cost is real. I protected it. That will have to be enough for now.